Good to be with you today. I'm Dan Stein, president of FAIR. Hope you're having a great spring. You know, immigration, border security, these are major issues right now here for Americans all across the country. Polls show public very concerned about what's happening along our borders. Could be a major issue in this election as well. A critical time like this, we really need to have an administration that is honest and candid with the American people about policy and what's going on. And we're deeply troubled here at FAIR about the character and conduct of the current Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, who has really set some historical milestones for perfidy and dishonesty in his presentation to the American people. The people out there, tax-paying citizens of this country, have a right. Indeed, they are owed an honest and candid assessment about what is in fact happening, not only at our borders, but why we see hundreds of thousands of people every month trying to get into the United States. Now, they talk a lot about root causes in this administration, the Biden regime, but the root causes, as Pogo had said a long time ago, we have met the enemy and they are us. The root causes are because of policy changes that the Biden administration itself has undertaken to dramatically improve the chances of somebody, when they get here, of never having to go back home, never being removed, never being put in deportation proceedings. Now, we Americans are concerned about the border, but in fact the cartels and the intending immigrants themselves have much better information than most Americans because they're interested. And they want to know what the loopholes are and how they get in. Since he took office, President Biden and his associate Mayorkas have systematically dismantled every element of U.S. immigration enforcement and control. It is impossible to name a single thing that this administration has done to improve the deterrence under the law, to improve compliance with the law, to encourage people to respect our borders, to in any way ensure that people who overstay visas will be identified and removed promptly. And yet, to watch Secretary Mayorkas on television over the weekend talking about immigration policy was to witness one of the most magisterial performances in deceit and perfidy I personally have ever seen in my life, and I've been around quite some time. And I want to show you a couple of excerpts of what we witnessed on these shows, and I want to explain to you what the problem is. Keep in mind that political asylum, which is different than refugee status, asylum is stuff that's made inside the U.S. Refugee status is done through a third country consultation mechanism for people who are outside the U.S. But Mayorkas contends that when Congress passed asylum laws, they were essentially saying that anybody, including hundreds of millions of people who want to show up at our borders, and regardless of how they got here, regardless of their conduct before they got here or anything else, are entitled to come across the border illegally, turn themselves in, and then make an asylum claim, and by doing so be released into the country, potentially for years at a time. Maybe they'll show up for their hearing, maybe they won't. We know most of these claims get denied, so we know most of them are fraudulent. But Secretary Mayorkas is not willing to admit that it is the process itself that is easily gamed and gimmicked that invites fraudulent asylum claims. So let's get right to it, okay? This is him talking to Chuck Todd over this last weekend.
Paint me a picture of what success looks like. Title 42 is lifted on May 23rd. What does success for your plan look like?
All right. Now, Title 42 is a health-related bar that was put in during the Trump administration that says you can't come into the country because of a pandemic. Now, when you lift Title 42, that normally would not have been a big deal, but for the fact that the Biden administration has systematically removed all the pillars of the enforcement apparatus, and therefore, by eliminating Title 42, declares open season on the border for people, literally hundreds of thousands of people who will try to come into the country. So what exactly is the specific Mayorkas plan? Let's listen.
Success looks like the orderly implementation of our plan, where we are applying our laws in accordance with their provisions in a way that respects individuals' rights to claim asylum as the laws that Congress provided allow.
All right, so notice that what's not there. He's setting up a process by which you will admit people under unlimited parole to make unlimited number of asylum claims. Now, if we had an immigration court system that was practical and workable and not so complex that the average American can't understand it, it wouldn't be an 8-9 year backlog before you even get an immigration hearing. And that whole court system, which was set up in the 1980s because apparently we had to have this quasi-court system because you couldn't rely on staff adjudicators to decide civil immigration benefits, has turned into a huge fiasco. It doesn't work, the dockets are overloaded, and it's adding to the collapse of the integrity of the system. Mayorkas calls it a process. He's looking for ways of simply maximizing the entry of people into the country, but he's not candid enough to admit it. He has no plan except to accelerate the processing of people who are making phony claims or otherwise getting around the Border Patrol.
You know, we're talking about individuals who are claiming fear of persecution in their countries of origin.
All right, claiming fear of persecution, it's easy to do. To make a credible fear application to get through the threshold process, you just have to make unsubstantiated, self-serving, uncorroborated declarations of harm. Now, under the law, you're supposed to show state action and a well-founded fear of persecution because of race, religion, and other factors, including this category called social group. And in recent years, the category of social group has now included fear of gang violence and general collapse of a criminal justice system, not what asylum was intended for. When most Americans think of political asylum, they think of things like people who are here legally through the normal course of affairs, but then cannot go back home. They're here legally, and they can't go home because of a coup or a revolution, or maybe a high-profile Cold War ambassador, a Bolshevik ballerina, whose claim for asylum would give rise to a rebuttable presumption of persecution. In other words, a limited number of people. Congress, you can see from the numbers of adjustments that they provided over the years, Congress was thinking maybe 5,000-10,000 people a year would get asylum. Very limited category. It is now ballooned into the hundreds of thousands and soon to be millions of people because they're all showing up at the border and making the claim, passing through various countries, many of them safe, many which under international law they were required to make the claim for the first place they went. Mayorkas basically tries to use the argument that anybody who wants to make a claim of persecution should be able to be admitted through a cumbersome process that goes on for years, given work authorization, access to benefits, and then, as you'll see, demand amnesty.
And our laws provide that they are allowed in immigration enforcement proceedings to make those claims before an immigration judge.
All right, the problem is he's letting them all go, and the hearing before the immigration judge will take years. So he's like saying, because there's gravity, we will all run at a certain pace. He's trying to say that in a perfect world this will happen, but the administration of the law is relevant. How it's actually working, in fact, is relevant. Mayorkas is sitting here ignoring the actual facts of the breakdown of the whole enforcement apparatus, the hearing process, the adjudication process. He's not honest enough to admit that the numbers of people trying to get into the country vastly exceeds the administrative capacity of the United States of America and what taxpayers are willing to provide for these elaborate trial-type hearings for an immigration court without limit. Basically, if you think about it, there are unlimited numbers of people who could show up at our borders. Are Americans on the hook for an unlimited amount of procedural process to have an immigration court that goes on through backlogs for years until Congress basically says we give up, give them amnesty? That's what Mayorkas is advocating.
If they are not successful, they are promptly removed from the country.
Okay, isn't that a bit of a problem? If they're not successful, they're promptly removed. Well, first of all, they've already been here probably 7 or 8 years by the time they get a hearing. They're promptly removed. That's a lie. It's just a flat-out fabrication. How can you possibly understand how anybody could possibly say something like this? Mayorkas apparently believes that his objective is to get through however many years he serves the administration, be a loyal soldier, and just simply lie to get through the process.
We're not talking about releasing individuals into the United States.
It's exactly what he's doing. It's projection. It's classic. He's doing exactly what he's saying he's not doing.
What we're talking about is individuals who make claims for asylum and they seek to vindicate those claims in court. And if they do not succeed, we enforce the law and they are removed.
All right, I want you to take a look at this guy's face. This tells you everything you need to know about the character of Alejandro Mayorkas. He has this sort of self-satisfied, smug face. He knows he's got a friendly interlocutor here. Chuck Todd's not going to ask him any tough questions. He's saying something like saying so makes it so, as Tom Sawyer might have said, Huck Finn or whatever. You know, it's saying so doesn't make it so. How can you go on national television and tell the American people something so patently ludicrous? There's a desperate need to impeach this man. There's a desperate need to remove him from office. He is clearly either not competent or unwilling to be sufficiently honest with the American people to give them the honesty they deserve. Mayorkas believes that every alien showing up has certain rights, that they deserve to have an opportunity to make a claim and to be treated humanely. Well, the American people desire to be treated fairly and honestly and humanely as well, including taxpayers, including the people who are paying for schools, education, housing. And you'll see as we move through the interview now, he begins to move toward the ultimate objective, which is getting as many people in as possible in order to enact amnesty.
What is the average time that you think you can get an asylum claim processed?
One of the great steps that we have taken in the Biden-Harris administration is to address this challenge. Historically, it's been 8 years plus, and we promulgated an asylum officer rule that allows our asylum officers to make the ultimate asylum determination. And we're going to take that 6 to 8 year period over time as we ramp up. We're going to take that to under a year.
All right, it's a great thing, but he hasn't done it yet, right? And he's going to dispatch asylum officers to make what he calls quick decisions within a year. But keep in mind, what Mayorkas intends to have happen is he wants to coach those asylum officers to rubber stamp approvals to get to yes. If they say no, the alien still goes into removal proceedings and they get before an immigration judge. That goes on for years. So what they're trying to do is find ways of managing a process without actually solving the problem. They're just trying to deal with the first cases first, find a way of accelerating the rubber stamping process, and of course they're administratively closing many cases in immigration court because they're throwing up their hands saying, well, they're low priority cases. You see, Mayorkas has established priorities, and he has essentially taken off the table the removal of almost all aliens in the country. There are very few people being removed. Of those people who are being removed, one of the priorities is supposed to be people who recently crossed the border and entered it without inspection. But the reality is Mayorkas is releasing most of those people, and the reality is most of them will not be removed because the very limited resources that Mayorkas wants to deploy for internal immigration enforcement, interior immigration enforcement, goes to very bad criminals, violent criminals, that kind of thing. You know, obviously, removals have dropped dramatically under Mayorkas. Why wouldn't they be? But he is making all kinds of promises he knows aren't going to be kept.
Fundamentally, though, Chuck, we need Congress to pass legislation.
I understand that.
Okay, there we go. We need Congress to pass legislation. Basically, I inherited a massive disaster, he says, and I'm going to make it worse. I'm going to do everything I can to simply validate the objectives of a political party, to make as many of these folks citizens as fast as possible, by whatever means possible, on the assumption that we think it's going to help our political party. The country's interests be damned, the future population growth of the country, its ability to withstand all this additional labor competition, the additional fiscal costs, the fact that Americans are still not getting, in many cases, good quality education. We're going to increase competition in schools. The fact that the rule of law has been utterly compromised and destroyed. Mayorkas is an obvious threat to the nation. I would like to say he's incompetent, but he obviously knows what he's doing. As you can see from that smug smile on his face, he knows exactly what he's doing. He needs to be impeached. If the Republicans take control of Congress in 2023, one of the first priorities has to be the effort to prosecute in the legislature the incompetence and perfidy of this administration and this man, Alejandro Mayorkas, who has allowed our borders to completely collapse, run out of control by design, specifically by design. No example in American history of the overt sabotage of U.S. immigration entry controls and border security. First time in history. It cannot happen ever again. I'm Dan Stein. Thanks for watching.